Obama ordered CIA to train ISIS jihadists. Declassified documents. US intelligence documents released to a government watchdog confirms the suspicions that the United States and some of its so-called coalition partners had actually facilitated the rise of Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, as an effective adversary against the government of Syrian dictator President Bashar al-Assad. In addition, ISIS members were initially trained by members and contractors of the Central Intelligence Agency at facilities in Jordan in 2012. The original goal was to weaken the Syrian government, which had engaged in war crimes against their own people, according to a number of reports on Sunday. The non-profit, non-partisan Judicial Watch, a group known for its investigation of government corruption and abuse, had obtained more than 100 pages of classified documents from both the US Department of Defense and the State Department through a federal lawsuit. So, just to confirm what we already knew, and that is that ISIS are in fact a creation of the US government and their so-called allies, including, no less, NATO, that the UK are part of. They did it to use them as a proxy army to fight Assad. So just to reiterate, the US government are to blame for the creation of ISIS. Remember this when ISIS attack London and kill innocent UK citizens? These documents aren't from a wacky website somewhere. These documents are from the US government. Judicial Watch, who are a very well-respected outfit because of the amount of stories they've broken over the years, had to sue the government to get them. So it would appear that those so-called pesky conspiracy theorists were right again. Remember this story from a few years ago when the West were getting rid of Gaddafi in Libya? Libya, the West and Al-Qaeda on the same side. You see, the Western leaders, especially Obama, strut around spewing soundbites to the media about how moral and decent they are every chance they get. But the reality is very, very different. The West used and teamed up with Al-Qaeda, the so-called enemy of America and the West. They teamed up with them in Libya to help oust Gaddafi. And now the West have created ISIS from the so-called Syrian rebels to fight Assad, who hasn't done anything to the people of the West. I keep coming back to this point, but it is vitally important. Do you remember when David Cameron lost the vote in 2013 to back the Syrian rebels? Cameron was spewing on about how it's our duty to help the poor pro-democracy supporters that were being killed by Assad. Well, those pro-democracy supporters were in fact ISIS. Remember that Michael Gove, laughably, our new Justice Minister, shouted, "You're a disgrace," to MPs who voted not to support ISIS in Syria? You see, governments in the West fund, arm, and train these terror groups to attack targets the West want to destroy. They did it in Afghanistan when the CIA asset Osama bin Laden, remember him? He was deemed a good guy by the West. They even gave him a CIA code name. It was Tim Osman. Bin Laden was paid by America to fight the Russians in Afghanistan. The West did it again in Libya, and they have done it again in Syria, but the blowback from supporting ISIS has blown up in their face. Or has it? Was ISIS getting out of control part of the West's plan for total control and domination in Europe and America with terrorism legislation like the Snoopers Charter, which will be introduced in the name of fighting the very terrorists that they have created again? But look how obvious all this is becoming. You can work it out if you can simply add 2 and 2 and come to 4. ISIS fighters capture weapons cache dropped by US for Kurds defending Kobani. Jihadist fighters from the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham seized at least 1 cache of weapons airdropped by US-led coalition forces that were meant to supply Kurdish militia battling the extremist group in a border town, activists said Tuesday. The cache of weapons included hand grenades, ammunition, and rocket-propelled grenade launchers, according to a video uploaded by a media group loyal to ISIS. So think about this. We can read newspapers from satellites in space, but we just can't drop a shed load of weapons in the right place. Does anyone really believe this? These weapons were intended to go to ISIS to keep them supplied, to keep the fear in the public consciousness. US loses $500 million in weapons given to Yemen, now in Al-Qaeda's hands. If any of our politicians weren't bought and paid for, they would be able to see just what is going on. But instead they keep quiet and go along with the official line that America can actually lose $500 million worth of weapons, and that weapons drops just accidentally fall into the hands of ISIS. Britain planned to train and equip 100 Syrian rebels. Remember, the Syrian rebels are ISIS. Britain planned to train and equip 100,000 ISIS rebels for a shock and awe campaign to defeat President Bashar al-Assad. General David Richards, who was then the UK's most senior military officer, drew up the plans 2 years ago, according to the BBC's Newsnight. The move was considered by David Cameron, the National Security Council, and US officials, but the plans were deemed too ambitious. Do you seriously believe that this didn't happen, at least in part? We're arming, funding, and training ISIS, the very terror organisation we are told to fear, the very organisation that are going to cause draconian snooping legislation to be implemented in the UK, and we're arming, funding, and training them. Utterly disgusting. The whole ISIS scenario is nothing like the way we've been told. How are they allowed to continue to broadcast on YouTube? How are they allowed to post on Facebook and Twitter? ISIS is being used for fear. Fear of an ISIS attack. Fear that will lead to more weapons sales for the military-industrial complex. We have to wake up to this sham. It's obvious you have to think and put the pieces together. ISIS are a real organisation. They are being allowed to operate. They are being funded, armed and trained by the very Western governments that are supposed to be opposing them.